Hi, my name is Dr. Darren Renzi, and this is Teach Talks from the Office of Transformational Learning. Teach Talks is a series of interviews that will highlight the brilliant instructional practices being used here at Smith, and also help new and existing faculty learn more about teaching, learning, and how to thrive in higher education. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Darren. How are you?
Good. Welcome to Teach Talks. We're so glad to have you with us. So do you have an example of maybe a difficult or even extremely difficult teaching moment that you had that you were able to learn from?
Yeah, so a similar type of exercise, but it's called the change game, and students actually pay $1 to buy a game card. And I've done it several times, and in my most recent time running it, it was with my largest class. So it was like about 120 students. And they're split up in similar ways. There's employees who are, everybody's given a game card, and the employees have a card with a number on it. The managers have a card with an M on it. They're told to go out in the hallway, and then they're given a seating chart, and I tell them, you have to get everybody in the seating chart in numerical order, and if you do that, then you get all the money that people put in, plus I put in 50 cents for every student. Then I go back in the room and I tell all of the employees that they cannot get up and move their seat, and they can't change their card with anybody else or they lose their $1. So it's set up from the get-go to be problematic. Now I have rules that you can fire workers. So they ended up firing a couple of students, and one student refused to move, and then one student just left the class. And I think it was very illustrated to me that some of the problems that can obviously come up with this kind of exercise, and that I need to have maybe some stopgaps in place to let them know, hey, you're supposed to come back, so that we can kind of, because they basically left and they didn't get a chance to, express their opinion. Now, one of them did email me afterwards and gave some opinions. Now, the discussion afterwards was incredibly powerful, but because one student, I think one or two students had just left, they didn't get the benefit of that. So I think, I've definitely learned, and I think when I do it this time around, one thing is that I actually made the reflection on it part of their final exam. So their final exam is now a paper where they have to, just a kind of 1 or 2 page paper where they have to reflect on the experience, which will then, I think, get people a bit more engaged and actually paying attention the whole time. But then I'll definitely make sure I scheduled a second class where we debrief the exercise. So they'll run the exercise in one class, and then I have a whole nother class. So I had to cut out something else in order to do that, but I felt like it was important enough because then at least if someone leaves, and this was I think our last class in that particular session, if someone leaves and they don't get a chance to come and reflect on the experience and learn from it, which is really the most important part of experiential learning. So yeah, that was very, I learned a lot from that.
No, but I think it's great that you were able to say, okay, where's the pivot? What's the adjustment? And like you said, I feel like experiential learning is something that people are really trying to integrate.
Yeah.
And that reflection piece is so crucial, because without it, it's sort of just an activity.
Yeah,
right?
There's not the learning that goes on if they don't actually reflect on it.
Exactly. So if you were to give sort of teaching advice, something that a new faculty member you think they should definitely do or definitely know, what would you say? One
thing I've been asked is like, don't you get tired of teaching the same thing semester after semester? Because I do. I teach our core management class. It's certainly, for some would see it as drudgery, right? It's not a popular class to teach because it's not easy to teach. And someone said, well, don't you just get tired of teaching the same thing every semester? I'm like, but it's not, right? Because it's different students. Even if I teach 3 groups in a row, I may be saying some of the same concepts, but the way the students react and interact with the material is completely different every semester. And so I think, if I were to give advice of actually definitely do this, is let your students kind of shape a little bit of what's happening in the classroom, because they are bringing something fresh and new to it every single semester. And yes, you may have said, I may have taught about like expectancy theory, like what feels like hundreds of times, right? But they haven't learned it, right? They're coming to it from the first time ever. And so try to see things through their perspective and get to know them.
That's something that I often tell my instructors, especially if they're like, oh no, I know it, like I've got it. And I'm like, but you don't know the students. It's a bit like driving. You don't know what the other driver is thinking, or you know all the rules, you've got your license, but that's quite different for the person coming towards you.
Yeah, it's an interaction.
Exactly. But you do eventually have to stop teaching and leave it all behind at the end of the day. So what do you do to try and strike a balance balance with that investment in teaching and the rest of your life?
Yeah, well, this is one benefit too. So people say, isn't it boring teaching the same thing? I'm like, no, because I have so much material that I've already developed that I can kind of go into my toolbox. And I think one thing that I've really learned is that you have to limit the amount of time you spend in prep. Almost to the point of setting a timer, because you can prep endlessly to teach a single class. If you do that, you won't have time for all the other things that faculty need to do. And so you have to, I think, set a timer for your prep. If you have the ability to get TAs, and most of the departments here, at least at Smith, is something that you can get.
And I agree. I think prep time, at the beginning, you're inclined to spend so much time doing it. And I'm not sure it has a direct relationship to how well the class goes,
So there is some research out there. They had this workshop on prep time, and the woman that was running it said there's an inverse correlation, actually, between the amount of time that you prep and the amount of satisfaction and learning from the students. And she also said that the research shows that women and minority faculty tend to spend more time prepping. And so there's a relationship there where actually the more time that you're spending, it doesn't necessarily pay the dividends. And so one thing that I do is that I know a lot of people are moving away from textbooks, but there's a lot of great resources in my textbook, and I just use those. There's even activities, that you can do in class. That power and politics exercise was basically adapted from something in my textbook. Now I adapted it for my own kind of purposes. And then the other big source, the Change Game, the one that I was talking about, that came from one of the teaching journals for my field. So every field has a teaching journal, and a lot of them have activities in them that you can just try out in your classroom. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel, especially if you're coming on and this is the first time you're teaching a particular class. They're almost always here too, are faculty who will share their materials. And so that's something really to take advantage of. I mean, every class I've ever taught, I've literally handed completely over to somebody else at one point and said, hey, just do with it what you will. And then they make it their own, but you're not starting, you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely, and there are amazing resources at Smith. So thank you for being with us today. I deeply appreciate it.
Of course.